Hi, welcome to episode 8 of Lean Coffee Talk. I'm Mark Graben, set up in the kitchen today. A great place to have some morning coffee. We're joined, as always, or as usual, as always, for Lean Coffee Talk by.
Jamie Flinchball, still in my office, but I do have my coffee.
Yeah, I thought I would sit down today instead of being at the standing desk. We haven't had, like back when this was lean whiskey, we had more guests, or sometimes I was gone, sometimes you were gone. Maybe we'll do that again. I don't know. It's always good talking. It's always good talking with you.
We should we certainly have, between your podcasts and mine, we get to talk to plenty of other people on podcasts too. But yeah, it's always nice to have a guest in. That's always fun.
Yeah. So we've both been to some events recently. We're gonna talk about coffee. We're gonna take a real deep dive into some General Motors lean history, NUMMI history from almost 40 years ago. But why don't we start with sort of the check in, and you've been someplace interesting recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big conference goer in general, but I was recently at a couple of things. One's not really a conference, but it was at the Center for Supply Chain Research at Lehigh. They have a twice a year symposium, um, which is a chance for companies to come together, share what they're doing in supply chain work. And this theme was on AI and supply chain. So I heard from Penske Logistics and NFI, Crayola and Sharp Services, and a whole bunch of others. I wrote up. I didn't try to summarize everything that was shared because I kind of figure that's for the conference cover, so to speak. But I could share my reflections in a post, just sort of some of my takeaways, and then I was also at Lehigh's annual entrepreneurial award event. Normally I just go. I've gone for many years. It's where I get to meet our latest scholarship recipient because I have a PhD there for technical entrepreneurship. And so we always get to meet the new recipient. That's always fantastic. But this year they have a student competition, a pitch competition. And so this year I was a judge, which meant I was working and kind of realized all the people I didn't get to talk to because while they were mingling, I was working. Uh, but I've said this before. I'll keep saying it. Anytime you get worried about the future, go hang out with some college kids who are getting more stuff, and you'll think we're in good hands. So that was another fun event.
Yeah, but it's nice you didn't have to travel for that. I guess that's the best kind of conference.
Yeah, and either one, a little 20-minute drive. So I have a couple conferences in the fall that will be pure learning for me, just sitting down with a notebook, and I'll travel for both of those. But yeah, this wasn't far. But you got to travel.
I did, but maybe before I talk about that, in terms of kids today, and there's a lot of positives, not to complain about the youths or the new generation. We had an opportunity. We stumbled into one of my wife's colleagues has a high school senior. She's going to be studying engineering, and she's involved in, I forget the name of it. My goodness, a big robotics competition
Yeah,
that's done every year. These teams, they build robots that have a challenge. They go and scoop up balls off the ground and shoot them up into big, large baskets. It's like robotic battle papa shot. And it was just amazing to walk around and see these teams from different cities. I think this was like the regional finals, and like just the overt embrace of nerdiness of not just the technical aspect, but like these teams have themes, and there's a lot of costumes, and the people in the crowd who are cheering have like, lit up custom programmed digital signs that they're holding up and waving, and like just the embrace of like not just the geekiness, but like the fun and the zaniness, if you will. That was fun to see, not just the embrace of STEM and science, but like let's show some personality. And some of the kids are like, quiet and behind the scenes, and some are being almost more theatrical. So just the celebration of all of that was really like these kids are going to do cool things in life, not just from a technical standpoint, but probably as entrepreneurs.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic, and embrace the beak.
Yeah.
I think that's it's not all heads down and at a laptop. You get to do fun things too.
Yeah, so that was fun to see. And then, back to my travels and a connection to AI. I 2 weeks in a row, I had a chance to go to the Lean Enterprise Institute summit that was in Houston this year, and then, the Shingo Connect, so it's what they're calling the Shingo Annual Conference, was in San Diego, and both events had a pretty large emphasis on AI. Not like some people might be saying like, "Oh, well, lean's outdated and AI is gonna replace it." No, I mean, the conversations were more about, how do individuals and organizations integrate AI. AI is not gonna replace human problem solving, but, I've been doing some experiments with trying to tune, my geeky thing here, tuning AI to actually be a coach that asks questions and prompts you. If you don't have a human coach who's qualified to walk you through and challenge you on A3 problem solving, having an AI tool that can do that. Most AI has a bias towards, I want to tell you how much I know. That's not good coaching behavior, is it?
No, no, it's fine for teaching, right? But uh, yeah, I think the AI has plenty of uh, the right space and the fit with lean. Many clients I have where the AI team, AI leadership, not owning all the application, but sort of the governance, the leadership, the strategy is actually owned by the continuous improvement team, because they're process thinkers and
Mhm.
everyone, they're transformational in nature. And so that's not true everywhere for sure, but certainly I don't think it's an either or choice.
So I'm going to throw a gratuitous plug out there. I want to go to markgraban.com/start. You can do I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'm going to do it. A 48-hour free trial of the AI coach that I've built. It's still kind of, beta or early stages, if you will. I'd love people to go kind of play around with that, bang on it, tell me, what feedback you have. And then yeah, I'll invite people to go check that out maybe.
Fantastic. A little weird those two conferences are back to back, but conferences do have a season. It's kind of spring and fall, but still back to back. But I think one of my takeaways in the AI and lead world, and you can't go to any talk on AI and not hear about data on cleanliness, hygiene, action, selectivity, interoperability, all those types of things, talking about data lakes. But I think the other layer, and I heard this very clearly from some of the speakers at the Center for Supply Chain Research Symposium, is that the other layer you have to get control of is your standard work, standard operating procedures. How do you do the work? And what's interesting is OpenAI actually put out a recommendation is that throw away your old instructions. Just let our AI figure it out. It'll be more efficient.
Hmm.
Mm. And just sort of, it speaks to me so clearly that if you want to reduce risk, reduce variation, improve your learning, be more efficient, be able to experiment. If you want to be able to do all those things, you can't just turn it over to a black box. You've got to control the how.
Yeah.
Mhm. And you might get suggestions from your AI on what the steps could be, how it might be more efficient, how it might be more effective. But if you throw that away, you have no control over your learning, your outcomes, your risks. And I don't see enough people talking about that. So I'm
Mm.
glad to hear Saul talking.
And then one other thought, this is an old technology or automation story. Don't automate a bad process.
Yep. And this is where, pure automation versus AI, and they'll say, AI can make it better, right? Without, it's a bad process, just tell AI to do it, it'll do it better. And if it's a bad process, probably true, right? But then you're, again, you're throwing away the opportunity to learn, to understand, to control. And again, you might use AI to find the most efficient path, but you still have to control the risk and downsides, the variation, and for those of us that use tools for regular tasks, you can start to really see some of the variation from day to day, from hour to hour, from iteration to iteration. That isn't necessarily right. Sometimes it is, but a lot of processes, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the Deming camp and I'm not in a corporate structure, so it's easy for me to say this or pontificate about the problems with the traditional annual performance review. And you read things about how, I saw ads for, using AI to improve the annual review process and automate. And it's like the silly loop where an employee is using AI to help write up their own input, and then the manager or HR are using AI to iterate on it, and like how these cycles of AI back and forth. And I'm like, let's just pull a number out of a hat and here's your rating.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll certainly see some of that. Uh, and this, you can say you want AI on some of the tasks that you really don't want to do that are a chore, and performance reviews show on the fence for many folks. So, but then maybe they can, if they're using AI for that, maybe they can spend more time coaching. What we rather see anyway.
More coaching, less, more ongoing coaching, less emphasis on once a year feedback. I mean, that was part of the Deming solution to it. Ongoing leadership and coaching instead of being a judge once a year.
Yep. Not an AI session for us today, but
Yeah.
probably talk on it at some point every session, as it's just part of the lexicon of the ethos of the environment in which we operate.
Well, and coffee is always part of the discussion here. I've got a really nice, I'm very happy with this cup of coffee. Let's talk beans, huh?
Yeah, let's talk bees. We've talked brew methods. We've talked, they certainly make a difference, right? We take the same coffee beans and you do a pour over, which I did. You did a French press, do a drip, whatever. There's the method matters. But just like making a cocktail, going back to our Lee whiskey roots, the ingredients matter. You can't get past good beans. The beans that come, out of the farms, go into the roasters, that go into the French press, right? Those matter, and they matter a lot. Yeah, and there we go.
Hold up my mini French press here for those who are watching.
And so this has been part of the evolution of coffee over the last couple of decades. But you used to get a jar, just say Colombian, right? And
Yeah.
and it would be, or you get Starbucks, and it's not even one country. It's if you get Starbucks coffee, it's a mix of many countries, mostly South America, interestingly, but many of those. You'll probably have 7 different countries represented at some level in a Starbucks blend.
Mm.
And if you're buying, Colombian coffee and that's all it says, it's probably a whole bunch of different farms, elevations, types, and that's efficient. You can't have any bad batches. You kind of get to blend out any of the variations or problems.
There's a parallel to bourbon or scotch in terms of blending different barrels together, or even from different distilleries to a blended whiskey. Yeah.
And a lot of those blenders, the skill was in blending, not in actually distilling. People like Jack Daniels, I don't know if they make any of or distill any of their own stuff, but maybe they do. I can't remember.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
But they also buy a lot of stuff and always have, and from others. And so that's kind of the idea is, well, the blending is where you're trying to reduce the variation, be consistent, be good, still the goal, but there's not a lot of nuance there. Right.
Well, I mean, you can create layers of flavors, in good blending, as opposed to we're just, dumping whatever procurement got a good deal on into our generic typical blend.
Yeah. And again, they'll still be looking for consistency, right? And that's where you'll have you'll have the cheaper brands that are buying the stuff that nobody else wants.
Mhm.
Put it together enough and roasted enough that you can't tell the difference from batch to batch, and then
Overweight it, a lot of it.
roast the heck out of it. So, and then you have the better blends as well. You also have regional, uh, they'll still be blends, but they're from a region. And so if you buy certain Ethiopians, it'll be from this region or that region, and it'll be sort of its own blending station at the green bean level before it actually, gets shipped to any roasters. So it's not a roaster buying a lot of beans. It's an exporter essentially, or a station that is taking beans from all the farms in the area and then processing them before they go out. So if you get a coffee from Ethiopia, and it just says Ethiopia, but it'll also say Origi, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have them all written down. So
Right. There's parallels to wine. You might have a
oh,
wine that says French red table wine or Burgundy or the village, or even more specifically, it's from this particular stretch of vineyard. And sometimes that's very highly prized.
very highly quality, right? So from being from a region and blending different growers, I think the vineyards have more control over their products and they understand enough, they have enough muscle that they can brand. So you can grow your own grapes and then, brand it, put it in bottles and do all that stuff. Coffee growers are the weakest link in terms of power dynamics in coffee.
All right.
It's been a problem for a long time. It's been a known problem. That's why fair trade started to come up around, fair prices. Some of that's just a label. Some of it's legit.
Uh,
But yeah, you can buy from a region, and then you can also buy just from a farm. Now this will be often smaller batches.
mhm.
This is like from one farm. You'll know the name of the farmer. You know the address of the farm. You'll see a picture of the farmer.
Yeah.
And you can either get this as green beans and that you then roast yourself, or specialty coffee roasters that do a lot of small batch. They will highlight that they work directly with farmers and you'll know this batch came from this farm. And that I kind of that I think it's extreme, but it's interesting, right? It's not always better. Certainly the people doing it try to select really good farms and really good beans and then take a lot of care in roasting it. And so it's almost like the care is the special ingredient because people feel they can only do this so many times, but you get the uniqueness, right? You get less of the nuance and the layers than you get with blending, but you get some of that uniqueness that's like
Mhm.
that's that far, right? It's interesting. Not always better, but very interesting.
Yeah. So today we're drinking single origin coffees that have a specific location and place, and like you said, even a name to it. So tell us about what you're drinking. What's its origin?
Yeah, so mine's from Peru, which I've kind of learned recently more enjoyment of Peruvian coffee. This is from a village, Hual, and so it's technically not one farm, but it's one village. So it's not a region. It's not these large farms that kind of come together. Many of these farms are smaller than my own property here.
Yeah.
Tiny little, my guess is most of these farmers had jobs and they used the land to grow some coffee. And so this is not their full-time profession. I couldn't imagine farms this small making a living.
Yeah.
But in this region, coffee grows well. The town of San Pablo, very small holders. They kind of close to 2,000 meters, and they kind of pull their coffee and then sell it as a specific, from a specific villa, one step shy of just from a farm, if you will. And these were, I bought these as green beans from Sweet Maria's, which is where I buy my green beans, roasted them myself, which I'm still in the learning process of. A little later roast, to get some of the nuance out of this, and quite good. And so it's neat. You can go look at the farm on a map, or go look at the village on a map and get a sense of, this isn't from, Pennsylvania, right where I live. It's from this one village, and it's many farmers who are probably part-time on very small plots of farm.
Yeah, that's interesting. You made me. That was a good idea of pulling up on the map the location and to take a look. So what I'm drinking here is from Burundi, a country that I really haven't you don't hear of much. It's just south of Rwanda,
Mhm.
uh, in Central Africa. It's described, it's a landlocked, mountainous country. So part of what makes this coffee interesting, I think, is that it's grown at a high elevation. This is from the Cankuzo province. The variety of bean, ironically enough, considering our podcasting history, is what they call a bourbon bean. Doesn't mean bourbon flavored or bourbon barrel.
Has nothing to do with it, right? But it's a little distracting, or confusing as the
But there's tasting notes, and I mean it is a delicious cup of coffee. I mean, I think it's relatively freshly roasted. Thinking about things we've talked about on other episodes, freshly ground, done in the French press. But yeah, it's talking about orange acidity, deep caramel sweetness. It's tasting notes, right? Whether it's bourbon or wine or what have you. But yeah, even though it's a single origin, there are some layers there. So I want to give a shout out, think about the chain of people along the way. Elliott Coffee in nearby Dayton, Kentucky. Great little hipster coffee shop in a neighborhood. They do really good stuff there. And I think they take seriously sourcing, coffees that are fair trade. And I bought some espresso beans. I don't have the bag handy, but it's literally the name of the farmer is on there, and this comes through a group called JNP Coffee. It says it's sourced by this company that goes beyond buying by equipping their partners with training and resources to flourish. That sounds nice, and that's actually Valor Coffee. So there's this chain, right? I mean, how many layers of profit are there? Unlike the winemaker, not as much of the profit goes to the farmer. So like is your one thing.
wine. You grow it, you distill it, you age it, you bottle it, you sell it, and then there's distributors and importers and retailers that all take a cut. But coffee goes through much more, and the growers don't even have the resources often to process, and then not to import, not to roast, not to retail, or to brew. And they have been, because of the countries they typically are in, and their relative lack of concentration, which is a good thing, but also means lack of economic power in this.
Mhm.
And so some farmers in Burundi or in Peru don't have the leverage to do well. And so often they do very poorly in the coffee supply chain, well enough to grow it, not to lift themselves up. And so roasters, importers, others, more, it goes beyond the fair trade label, which again has some rules to it, but it's A, it's not well enforced, and B, it doesn't really guarantee the farmers are doing well. So as consumers, besides perhaps getting a better cup of coffee, we're helping the supply chain, we're helping farmers by paying more attention, and sometimes paying a premium for stuff that somebody is trying to send some of those profits back to the farmer.
Yeah. Now, it says here, just doing a check online, that Burundi's coffee industry, it's the largest cash crop and key export.
Yep.
Says the farm structure, it's more than 800,000 smallholder families, often with just 50 to 250 trees each, and that the harvesting is typically handpicked and like small production, maybe subsistence farming, basically. Right.
Yep.
Or people doing it as a side hobby. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that is a lifeline to a lot of people there in Burundi.
Yep. So, if you like a single, if you're for our bourbon drinkers, if you like a single barrel bottle,
Mhm.
because it's unique, right? And it's like, well, is it better than the ones that they blend? Maybe not, but it's unique, and that's fun and interesting. Think the same way about coffee, right? Go find a roaster that's talking about, a specific farmer that they're working with and they know by name and they've probably visited even. And it's interesting in the cup and it's important for the supply chain.
And you can buy, maybe you can buy some green. I know you can buy green beans from Sweet Maria's. I haven't done coffee roasting in a long time, but they've got a page about Burundi coffee and
Yep. And that's where I got my beans from. And there's other green bean providers, but I do like them. The biggest challenge is, supply chains are, not that they buy small batches, but by the time I've roasted them, they're sold out. Right. I can kind of go, oh, I'll just keep getting those again, but it does provide a lot of learning because I almost have to go then try a different farm or try a different region, try a
yeah,
different approach, and that's all interesting.
yeah. The wide world of coffee.
Yes, which good thing we have more episodes planned so we can.
Yeah. Maybe in a future episode, we can explore the idea of fermented coffee, since fermentation isn't, how you make beer or wine and then the distillation into spirits. The espresso beans that I bought, I'm interested to try, go through what they call a 48-hour fermentation. There were some other beans that had a 72-hour fermentation, which, as fermentation tends to do, develops flavors or even a little bit of funkiness, as the guy at Elliott Coffee was describing. So maybe for a future episode.
Sure, sounds good.
Or I don't know if you take those green beans and you can probably figure out a way to ferment them.
Uh,
It's just a water process. And
I think it's too late at that point, but
is it?
we'll figure it out.
We'll research that. Yeah, if it's more the fermentation of the, yeah, actually, no, you're right, because I think it's more of the berry around.
The pulp is what's
Yeah,
fermented, not the seed itself.
that's right.
All right. Well, we're gonna cover some. So we're gonna enjoy our coffee. You've got your lean coffee mug. I
Yeah.
pull them hiding out, and I have a Cobra mug.
Motorcycle company there, for those who don't know.
It's
Cobra. Yep.
co-founder status for me, but so we're gonna talk into some lean topics. But a really quick, I wouldn't even call it a detour, but a little retro topic around lean whiskey.
In the news here. Yeah.
In the news section is we have some consolidation pending, I'll say, where Sazerac, which was also already massive, and the spirits and whiskey category.
The parent company of Buffalo Trace in particular.
Yep. They are looking to basically merge or acquire Brown Forming, which owns Jack Daniels and a whole bunch of other things, right?
Woodford Reserve is their probably biggest bourbon brand. Yeah.
Yep. Biggest bourbon brand under them. So, this has already been going on for a while. Brands acquire other brands. And so they all become part of the family. But we talked already in a previous episode. I didn't look up which episode, about the drop in consumption in whiskey and spirits in general. And that leads us to sort of beer gain, supply chain bullwhip effects, which has very clearly affected the market where some people built capital, built production facilities that they shouldn't have.
Mhm.
Others put barrels into racks that they maybe shouldn't have.
Yeah.
They can't put them into bottles because their demand isn't there. And that's going to add to financial strain for many companies.
Let me take up a different part of the supply chain. My uncle owns a lumber company in North Carolina, and I was talking to him the other day. He had a mill in Kentucky that they had to shut down. They were cutting oak for barrel staves. He said, "No one's making barrels right now."
And that's the dynamics of the bullwhip effect is especially our mutual friend, Chris White can talk about this, right? But the further you get from the trigger, the greater the magnitude. So if
Yeah.
you're out running, a lumber mill for barrels for selling equipment to make whiskey, you could be in real trouble.
Right. So let me start as a consumer of bourbon. Let's say my bourbon consumption is the same, but I've got too much inventory at home. So I stop buying, or not totally, but I buy less bourbon, and that sends a signal to the market, and that's where it starts propagating down up back up the supply chain, and those amplifications get where the bourbon producer might now bottle fewer bottles, they might distill less, and then all the way back upstream. My uncle's pretty far up that supply chain. Maybe the people growing the trees,
Or maybe broader.
they that would produce better quality wood for the future. One of the knocks on modern bourbon quality supposedly is that the barrels are made from young trees.
Mhm.
So let's get older trees. Thankfully, they can keep the trees growing.
Okay. But maybe can't plant as many new ones, but they can keep them growing. So one of the things is as this affects different companies at different levels, is you get consolidation. That leads to other losses, right? Going back to the differentiation in coffee, the differentiation in bourbon. Uh, I like to tell the story of Old Crow, which was a high quality brand. You and I got to sample pre 1970s Old Crow, but they got the last time this happened at a major level was in the 80s. And the Old Crow was, nearly bankrupt. Jim Beam bought them,
Yeah.
threw away the recipe.
Right.
And now Old Crow is young Jim Beam. So we lost forever, other than those who are going to find a 1970s bottle.
Yeah.
Okay. Or people like Glen Street Distillery trying to learn what they can about the old recipe and bring it back to life in different ways. And
Under different names.
yeah, under different names, and it's not the same, right? But kind of the legacy of, but Old Crow is gone forever, right? So will the same thing happen here as consolidation appears inevitable?
Yeah.
Will we lose some of the variation, right? You take 5 brands, they all move under a new master distiller, as they kill some old recipes because it just wasn't worth running. The decision making is narrowed because there's fewer people making decisions. Do we lose some of the variety and nuance in the market as a result of these supply chain dynamics?
Yeah. I mean, I think back to I got to interview Bob Lutz on Lean Blog Interviews podcast, probably going back 13, 14 years ago. And he had a book out at the time called Car Guys versus Bean Counters.
Yep.
And nothing to do with coffee, of course. Well, origin of the phrase bean counter. But I wonder if, yeah, I mean, in tough business times, do the quote unquote bean counters and these large corporate conglomerates. So it's a huge difference between our friend David Meyer and Glens Creek, and it's a craft product and its owner operated, and he has this passion for quality. We know in any industry that passion for quality gets filtered out through layers of financial focus and management. So, Brown Forman was maybe going to be acquired by Pernod Ricard, one of the big, massive handful of corporate liquor and alcohol conglomerates. Would some of that variation go away? So I think about Woodford Reserve in recent years. There's been product proliferation within the Woodford family. They have the Woodford Double Oak. They do a lot of small experimental releases. They do annual releases. They do now the Double Oak. I've got one that's a wheat whiskey aged in a different type of barrel. I forget exactly, but at some point the bean counters look and where do they decide, like, are these special releases profitable because it sparks demand? The price point is higher. It's a bit of a halo quality effect on the rest of the products, or do the bean counters say, like, oh, it's inefficient, just make more regular Woodford Reserve that we can sell to every airline and every bar and stop specializing? I don't know how those business dynamics work out, but then there's the probably less risk to cutting quality in terms of aging. Like
Right.
there's going to be
People, you've changed your bottle it fast because people need it.
yeah, but it's in France when there's a glut and an oversupply of grapes and wine, like wine literally gets dumped out into the earth to help limit supply, which is it's crazy it's crazy to think about. But I mean, there might be different ways of cutting corners on distillation process or other things, or maybe the cheaper whiskeys are aged less just to get them out, and there's less investment in the barrels and aging process. I don't.
I think, probably not universally, and a lot of it depends on the power dynamic. Who has more control over things. But again, just to the point of a master distiller can only pay attention to so many things. And if they're managing, 40 brands instead of 8,
Mm,
and they put as much thought into the nuances and the differences of each.
mhm.
And that's where, I think not just the accountants, but just the consolidation is its own, whether intended or unintended, and usually it's probably unintended, old crow story aside,
Mhm.
things will be lost. I
Yeah.
think that becomes inevitable.
There was, we think about the bean counters and the cost cutting. A story comes back to mind. I read a book long time ago. It was about the history of Heineken beer, of all companies, that started, a family company in the Netherlands, and grew and grew. And it's just really, it was almost like a Michael Lewis type fun business book read. And one of the things that always stuck with me was the illustration of cost cutting and the impact on quality. The brand was Stroh. Do you remember that brand at all from Detroit?
Yep, absolutely.
I think it's now just Stroh's ice cream. I don't know if Stroh's beer has been rebooted by somebody, but it used to be a very, very popular brand of beer.
Yep.
And the story in the Heineken book was about, like, you have recipe A that was like a premium beer. Everyone really loved it. Somebody came up with recipe B that was a little bit cheaper. Nobody could taste the difference between A and B. And then they cut from B to recipe C. No one could taste the difference between B and C. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yeah, we cut out there for a second.
For some reason, my iPhone beeped and said, "Do you want me to be the microphone?" I'm like, "No, I don't know." I wasn't even touching the phone. But they went through to recipe K. No one could taste the difference between J and K. The difference between A and K was huge,
Yes.
and their sales plummeted. People eventually realized that Stroh's was now cheap crap, and really killed the brand and the reputation and maybe even the whole company. That was a cautionary tale that sticks with me. I think about that in other contexts. The gradual cost cutting has a long term effect, even if you're not detecting it now.
Yeah. And, small quarters cut, you don't always know the consequences. So real, since you brought up Stroh's, when Prohibition hit, used their equipment to make ice cream.
And reply.
And that's how the ice cream brand is Stroh's. And I think they split. I think it's split. There's sort of two different companies. I don't remember that for sure. But I have to say, I do from my time living in Michigan, I love Stroh's ice cream. But I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that's a Prohibition, necessity is the mother of invention. And
Yeah.
yeah, they started making ice cream. So
Yeah.
be careful. Consolidation, supply chain dynamics, bullwhip effect, beat counter decisions, protect the core of who you are as a company.
Yeah.
Don't lose it, whatever those threats become.
Little bit of trivia. I just did a search here. Stroh's was actually founded in Detroit in 1850. Long history. The brand is now owned by Pabst. Production was taken over by Miller in 1999. So yeah,
So Kenny is probably gone. Probably can't get that anymore. It's just another version or something.
I think there's a parallel to David Meyer trying to recreate the old recipe, Old Crow. It says there's a company called Brew Detroit that began producing a version of the Stroh's Bohemian style Pilsner in Corktown, that part of Detroit. So I think that's, again, they probably can't use the name, but trying to bring back the font.
Of course, you can't. All sorts of reasons you can't actually duplicate it, but it's worth trying, right? And it makes for an interesting story.
Yeah.
All right, want to cover our bigger topic?
Yeah, this is the more directly lean related topic. I've done a couple of blog posts on this theme, and we can link to those. We're going to talk about it here. But it was about 10 years ago. I learned that Wayne State University in Detroit had the archives from someone Jamie and I both know, Don Ephlin, who was a pretty high up executive in the UAW union. I think he was the president of what they called the Ford group, but he wasn't the top president of the union. He was amongst the very senior leaders and was involved in a lot of different projects that were innovative over time, NUMMI, Saturn, and Don was a guest lecturer at MIT, in particular for the Leaders for Global Operations program. So you took the kind of the workshop. You're basically sitting around and listening to Don tell stories, kind of version of a small class, right?
Yeah, and he often went on the annual pilgrimage to factory tours with the group. And I spent some time on the bus with him and just bending his ear.
Yeah.
Coming from a UAW background,
Name here, yeah,
experience, right, at Chrysler. He taught me a lot about how his mix work. It wasn't that he was, just pro-union, anti-management. He was pro-better, right?
yeah. Pro leadership.
Yeah, leadership, absolutely. And this isn't going to be all about Don Ephlin. It's going to be about NUMMI, but fundamentally, I still remember he told me unions reflect management, but
Yeah.
and so if you have a union and you have a rough union relationship, that your penance, that's my words, for penance, right? You kind of got what you deserved. And it was basically, sort of treat it with care, invest in it, lead it, and you'll get good things in return. It doesn't make it easy, but that's something that's always stuck with me, and it's it's emanated and reflected in experiences I've seen in all my time working with different unions.
Yeah. And he was really ahead of the curve and pro chain. He was part of groups, Ford, that went and visited Japan in the early 80s. There's documents and reports there in the archives at Wayne State. But one of the other things, I found that was especially interesting to me, given my GM roots at the beginning of my career, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago now, a report about NUMMI. It was printed in 1987, and it was called NUMMI Management Practices Executive Summary. It was an internal GM document. It was labeled GM Confidential, and it was written by a group called the NUMMI Management Practices Study Team, which included Larry Spiegel, who was my second plant manager at General Motors. I call him the good one to make it. But he was one of the original. He was, probably been GM 15 years before being sent to the launch of NUMMI, of what was dubbed the NUMMI Commandos. So, so Larry's name is in there, and there's so much we can dig into, but I'm going to just share a few quotes, and we're going to riff and talk back and forth here. But it talks about the purpose of the document. It says the study was undertaken to document NUMMI's management system and to identify the underlying principles that make it successful, so that they may be understood and, I think this is interesting, where appropriate, applied within General Motors. I don't know what their filter and criteria was for the where appropriate.
Yeah, could be where we can get away with it. And I think, to that specific quote, there's sort of two things that stand out for me. One is that NUMMI, I think, was Toyota's most deliberate effort to sort of codify its management system to date. Then with their mostly Japanese system up to that point when they launched NUMMI, the social fabric. I mean, it's not that they didn't document it at all, but they, they didn't have, here's the management system of how we run Toyota. They didn't have it existed in some pieces, but a lot of it existed in the ether, if you will.
Sure.
And this is, okay, how do we start to codify this so that we can run NUMMI well?
Yeah.
And then on the GM side, trying to document it, right? Lots of people, whether it's Steve Spear and his work or it's Jeff Liker and his work, tried to get to first principles. Now, Toyota has now long after now said, here's the Toyota way, right? But up to that point, Toyota hadn't really, and researchers hadn't really codified first principles of Toyota. This might be the very first effort, in a short of, maybe putting aside Taiichi Ohno's book and things like, but maybe an external view of maybe the first effort to sort of codify Toyota way.
Yeah, and there's these principles, and there's 5 as the document calls. We're going to walk through these 5 major management strategies. But for those who don't know the history in a nutshell, NUMMI in Fremont, California, was a failed General Motors plant by the early 80s.
Failed on every metric,
Right.
Quality, productivity, in plant quality, out of plant quality, union relationships. It had the most wildcat strikes. You pick a metric, it was the bottom of the barrel.
And, at that point in the early 80s, Toyota was not doing any production in the US. So NUMMI was very much an experiment, a first step, a less risky. It was a joint venture. It was supposed to have a limited time frame that went beyond that limited time frame, as it turned out. But because it required, I think FTC had to allow these automakers to collaborate. But they literally had to translate this through John Shook and others into English and translate it for American workers. So that is definitely an opportunity to step back and reflect and say, well, what are we teaching people from scratch, as opposed to people that come in and maybe it's their first job and they're coming into this more fully formed culture. They were really trying to create something new at NUMMI.
Yeah, and so it's the dominant voice was on how we run things was going to be Toyota. That was acknowledged up front. but it wasn't necessarily meant to be duplication.
Mhm.
Mm. And the point of it being a learning experiment is, can we even do this in the U.S.?
Right.
I like especially when I'm teaching entrepreneurship, but I really believe this in all aspects, is if you're heading into a risky world, what tests can you do? What experiments, what validation, what learning, what questions to reduce your risk and your chances of success of your strategy? And so they saw this, Toyota saw this as a chance to reduce their risk by doing a joint venture where a lot of other things like labor law and hiring people, like all that kind of GM kind of already had a basis for.
Yeah. One other, I think, key point here in the intro to the document, it says the key to NUMMI's success is not its tools or techniques, but the management philosophy that gives meaning to them. And so, this is intended as an internal lessons learned document. When I joined GM in 1995, it's not like they gave me a copy of this book. I don't think I ever saw it at GM. I think the lessons hadn't been spread, especially the first year under my first plant manager, the very traditional mold. And even then, I've got a different artifact that I did keep from that era of the GM. I think it was called the Competitive Manufacturing Practices Guidebook, and it was really an encyclopedia of TPS automotive tools, fixed line stop positions, and Kanban racks, and the philosophy that would actually allow somebody to pull the andon cord was quite often missing at GM and other automakers. When I was there, it was definitely quantity over quality. There's articles from Ford even a decade later of, I often point to this BBC article that said, the new Ford truck plant in Dearborn, Michigan had an andon cord that was pulled twice a week. Not a tools problem.
Mm.
That's
And I think that technology,
real quick. They drew the comparison at Toyota Georgetown. The number was 2,000 tons.
and I think, the acknowledgement right up front that this wasn't, from Toyota, but also, from a newbie standpoint, this was about a management system and,
Yeah.
and not just, tools and techniques. And so, sure, they brought the tools and techniques and policies and practices, but they made it very clear this is a management system. And that's where most of their training went, was for the management layers.
Mhm.
I'm not saying they didn't train the hourly workforce, but that wasn't, they didn't see that as the risk.
What's the problem? They didn't see workers as the problem.
And so they saw the risk as management, and that's the part where we have to invest the training, and they put a lot of effort into that.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's just all these lessons that were understood by 1987, if not earlier. I mean, it was understood and now it's being documented. Another thing that stands out here, the NUMMI philosophy is based on mutual trust and respect. Now, that's something Don Ephlin would, of course, been completely on board with. Mutual trust and respect between management and employees, and a shared responsibility for quality, and the belief that problems are best solved by those who do the work. My 1995 General Motors experience was not an environment of mutual trust and respect. And it was definitely not in an environment, the problems were to be solved by engineers and by technical people was the environment there.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't want to say to be fair, that's the wrong phrase. But mutual trust or respect, I think it's often phrased in these terms between management and hourly workforce. You can't, if you're going to build a culture, you can't just turn it on and off for specific subsets.
Sure.
You either have to live it or not. And I think a lot of these companies that wrote those words down, but then didn't live on them,
Mm.
you see that mutual trust and respect didn't exist at a peer level.
Mm.
The plant manager, area manager,
Sure. Sure.
supervisors, right? And so, management to engineer. So it wasn't just, I think we often emphasize the management to hourly employee trust and respect either is there or not, but it's sort of, you're sitting there as a leader do you live mutual respect and trust with the people you work with? Whether, exempt or non-exempt, right? Just do you live it? And I think you go back to Ford and GM in particular, you saw, no, that if I don't even do it with my peers, how am I ever going to do it with the ally?
Yeah. I'm just having a random flashback to the GM plant. One of the production engineers who I had to work with a lot was notorious for having a full voicemail box. So when I mean, this is old man talk here. When I started, we did not have email at GM at that point. When I started in 1995, I literally had an answering machine on my desk connected to my phone. Now, very quickly, they put out a voicemail system. But this engineer, you try to call him and leave a voicemail, and his mailbox is full. And I remember talking to him one day about like, dude, I can't reach you. I need, he's like, he was very intentional of making sure the voicemail box was full. So I was having to go chase him down or find him or put a post-it note on his desk. I mean, he was reacting to the system and being overloaded and overburdened. I mean, it's more complicated than saying he didn't have respect for his coworkers. I don't know why that story popped in my head, but no, I mean, I guess the point is, it would be unfair to say he didn't respect others, but
Right.
it was a mutual trust and respect environment, including for engineers, management to engineers, not just management to UAW.
Yeah. So that's, is it a management strategy or not? It is kind of, I don't say it's either on or it's off because of course it's degrees, but again, you can't just live in and say, this is how we treat the UAW. It's like, no,
Sure.
this is how we lead. This is how we engage other people. And we're,
And then one of the other, I think, just key point quotes, conclusions of this document. Quality, productivity, and morale are the natural results of a system in which problems are seen as opportunities for improvement rather than as failures. 1987.
yeah,
GM on some level understood that, but I think it goes to show that producing the book and having the book learning, you could make everybody read this manual. I'm curious how many people at General Motors actually read it and at what levels. You could read those words, but it didn't mean that turned into the reality.
and I think you have to also realize how Toyota got there because if you go work with Japanese companies, that is not the base culture in Japanese business.
Mhm. Yeah.
And 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 I don't want to get into a Japan versus Toyota detour, but fundamentally, Japanese companies do not highlight problems.
Mhm.
And they're actually much more prone to hide them than U.S. companies. And so this wasn't Japanese to America. This was Toyota bringing Toyota to America.
We've seen that hiding of problems with a number of Japanese automakers, including Toyota, has had issues with that. So you're right. I mean, it's a harmony culture. They say the tall blade of grass gets mowed. Like I think Toyota's really had to create something special with the darn cord system and Kaizen to get people to speak up because it's not automatic in a Japanese company that tends to be so hierarchical and seniority based. Uh, to be fair to Toyota, they created something. They created something at NUMMI.
Yeah. And so you almost think that could have been something that should be embraced, but was very difficult, especially as you come out of NUMMI into other opportunities to apply it. It was a much bigger cultural thing than the system itself.
Yeah. And you know, again, I'll compare and contrast. 1995, workers were blamed for quality problems, even though I've got, stories about how these quality problems were absolutely caused by bad management decisions in the acute sense. And then there was just the chronic culture rot of people learn quality isn't valued here. So I'm going to just keep the machine running. And, it's just kind of more the chronic way that affects morale and individuals. And it was definitely an environment where problems were seen as problems and failures, and people got yelled and screamed at, as opposed to really getting coached or it was a different if the leaders who did the yelling and screaming, they would probably say they were coaching, but it was more like a stereotypical, or there's still football coaches like this today who get in their players' faces and yell and scream instead of what we I think in lean circles, when we say coaching, we mean something, a very different style.
We do. And, we have to keep in mind, this is there's two-sided argument around what made UAW special, but, they hire almost all of the same UAW people back.
Mhm.
The GM plant had closed, and they brought the same people back, the same union leaders back. They didn't just kind of go, oh, we're going to have new union leaders.
No, different contract.
Different contract, but same union leaders, same employees. And the one caveat you can argue is, at this point, these folks had already lost their job. They kind of, you don't know how much of a factor was, it's this or nothing.
Yeah.
We've already proven we can close this plant, so maybe be a little more accommodating.
Mhm.
You don't know how much that weighed on things because you can't A/B test it. But fundamentally, these are all folks that had built up a expectation of that behavior. And so when you have that expectation and you get somebody coming to you, asking you a question or engaging you, it's really hard to trust that right out of the gate.
Mhm.
Or I'm used to everybody yelling at me
Mhm.
in the same building,
Mhm.
similar job and a similar line with a different product. And here comes the supervisor. I'm expecting bad treatment.
Sure.
They're saying different things. Do I trust it or not?
Sure.
And that, I think, I think the trust, I think it'd be really interesting to survey people like before they enter the building, a week after the building, a week, where did the trust click?
Mhm.
Because they weren't granted the trust. Like I said, that we had a job, we're happy for that. That had to be a factor. But where did the trust click?
Yeah.
I write about the 4 C's of trust, which are care, competency, communication, and consistency.
Mhm.
And so I have to imagine that, first of all, the management system is not only about this, but it helps provide the consistency, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like on Tuesday I get treated well, and Wednesday I get beat up. Well, hey, when's it coming? It's quick. Look over your shoulder, it's coming next. But no, like
Yes. Yeah.
let's avoid the slip ups. But even the beginning with that care, I'd imagine that was perhaps sort of removing expectations of bad behavior and learning to trust in management had to be probably one of the hardest things to overcome in
Yeah.
the continuity the way that they did.
Yeah. At my plant in Michigan, the transition between the first plant manager and the second plant manager was in the context of a couple of really horrendous quality spills that affected the Cadillac plant. And, for all the I've blogged about this and shared some of these memos. For all the yelling and screaming at workers in person or documented in memos, the core of things was bad management decisions about keep the line running, keep the line running. It bit them in the ass. Our plant was half empty at the time. So it was not shut down, but Larry coming in, and this was part of the way the first plant manager would pressure people. It would be the threat of, we will not earn more business to fill the rest of this plant if we don't improve. And there was the implied, we could lose the whole thing. But that's a different, that's just that the threat of that disaster is different than having already gone through the disaster of a plant closure. It's just different circumstances. I think human nature, it's easier for people to say, they won't shut us down. They got to put that new engine program somewhere. We got the police. We don't need to earn it. We don't need to prove, that was just, yeah.
It's easy to dismiss a threat that looms over you but never comes. As we talk about the debt load of the U.S. government, we predicted doomsday about the debt in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's like my entire life we've lived with that threat. It hasn't come yet. So like, was it imminent or is it not imminent? And they went through the actual factory closure. They felt it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a false threat. what I don't know, even though GM and NUMMI were kind of clear this was an experiment, I don't know how clear they were with UAW. Is this a five? Yeah, you're all gonna have jobs for 5 years, and again, or if we do these things well, we hope to stay open forever. That how those conversations is not something I've ever researched or been able to research. But again, having the job, I think, makes a difference.
Yeah, I just did a quick search here. The initial FTC approval limited the joint venture to a 12-year lifespan due to antitrust concerns, and that the plant survived until the GM bankruptcy. That was roughly 2009, 2010, I think, when.
Yeah, I think 2010 is when it actually hit, but it obviously started brewing in 2008. But yeah, that's I think
You're right, 2010.
But if you have a 12-year gig, that ain't bad, right? Even after you've lost a job, a decent paying job, a well paying job, 12-year run, you're like, sure,
Mhm.
because it was they were good paying jobs, and then even when they did reach that final closure in 2010, obviously GM's bankruptcy. They had to do some things differently. They didn't need the product. It gave them both legal and PR cover to back out of that joint venture. Toyota looked at all the ways they could keep it going, but fundamentally, 98% of their supply chain was throughout the Midwest.
Right. California was at that point a weird place to have a factory.
It did not make sense, and it made the supply chain much more expensive. So it wasn't about operating in California. It wasn't about the contract. It wasn't even about the product. It was really just the supply chain was too expensive to sustain on its own. And so that's when they finally closed NUMMI after all that time.
Mhm. Yeah. And that is now the land and the building run by Tesla, which is a different discussion for a different day. It's no longer the Toyota production system.
Yeah. No, and then there's no hire back the same people under a similar contract.
No, it's not union. There are some former NUMMI people that were at least working at Tesla about a decade ago when I knew somebody there. And the consensus was like, yeah, don't that to survive at Tesla, you don't bring up that Toyota shit.
Yeah. So yeah, the same building. That's about it.
Same building. And a tent in the parking lot, which that's a whole different discussion. So let me run through the 5 major management strategies. We've already dug into a couple of these, but as they were laid out in the document, 1, building mutual trust and respect. 2, integrating quality into the process. 3, this is very Toyota language, developing people through teamwork and learning. 4, making problem solving central to management. And 5, designing systems to prevent errors. So, I mean, that's all really good TPS language and practice, in particular, the problem solving, mistake proofing, the whole idea of developing people. Like one thing I think it's interesting, maybe at a broader point, making problem solving central to management. One thing I see in a lot of organizations is that lean means we want the frontline managers and lower level managers and everyone to be better problem solvers. And executive leaders are not demonstrating that they're not expected or required to demonstrate the same problem solving discipline.
Right. Yeah. As we that discipline, I think that overall discipline, right, comes from the culture, and that's where I think the failure to extract from NUMMI for GM comes truth, right? The practices, here we have this book, and it was well intentioned, right, to sort of spread the knowledge. And if you read the book, you kind of go, yeah, this isn't just practices, right? But we need to fundamentally lead and manage differently. So it's not like the lessons were opaque.
And they weren't superficial. I mean, this is a 100-page document.
Yeah. So they were thorough. Now, there was a lot of advice on how to change culture.
Mhm.
And again, NUMMI got to relaunch, right? They didn't take over a GM plan, bring in some new, teach those people how to run, then slowly shift from a GM system to a Toyota system. So you could kind of argue Toyota actually missed that learning. Not that they needed it, but that kind of like from a GM standpoint, how do we actually transform a GM plan into a more Toyota-like plan? Now, whether they thought they should learn that or not was a different question. But it even pointed, I think, I wonder how much NUMMI influenced when Toyota Georgetown was launched. They went out of their way to hire as few automotive people as possible. Right? We're going to hire people and we're going to train them Toyota way, but we're not going to take a whole bunch of GM people or a whole bunch of people. And so I would kind of wonder how much of their experience in partnering with GM influence.
Well, I mean, and I don't think they would say the GM UAW people were bad people, but I would say they had been conditioned over decades. You know, they were very much shaped by that environment. And it's hard to start trusting. You don't change culture by snapping fingers. So I could definitely see that one lesson learned would be let's get people who are fresh and not damaged by 20 years in the traditional auto industry. One other thing I'll point people to when it comes to why GM didn't learn the lessons, there is a fascinating hour-long episode of This American Life that asked that exact same question. My second plant manager, Larry Spiegel, is quoted for like 2 sentences in that piece. And, I've done my own interviews with a guy, Steve Barra, who was also one of those initial GM NUMMI commandos. He left the company. He just did not believe that if it was a dozen of them roughly, that they were going to be scattered around the company one by one. Like Steve Barra and some others said, no, we can't be a NUMMI drop in a GM plant bucket. You need to send us all together to turn around and run one of the other plants. And GM chose not to try that. And, Steve said, okay, I don't share this hypothesis of this being worthwhile. And he left and became a consultant to teach people about NUMMI and the lessons learned. And some of them, like Larry Spiegel, did get dropped in to be the single leader. First, he was at the Warren transmission plant, turned things around. So then they gave him the Livonia engine plant. I mean, what if that one person is the plant manager? That was a high leverage point. But if initially, I mean, I don't think he was a plant manager right away when he came out of NUMMI. I'm sure it was frustrating to work under a traditional GM plant manager.
Yeah, and I don't know if a single plant manager is enough, even if they are there, because they're maybe if you give them 5 years to really get things rolling.
It took Larry a couple of years. Like it was a slower turnaround than the NUMMI turnaround because it wasn't a fresh start and a fresh reboot.
Right.
But that plant went from like the bottom of the barrel to top quartile in a couple of years.
And I think, the broader lesson for me is I think copy paste is inherently hard. And so Toyota still struggles with this as they go build model areas at suppliers and other companies. I mean, I've been to companies where Toyota had come in, taken over a cell, built up a model area, and then you go and visit them and they're like, yeah, Toyota was in here and they built a model area. And they're like, was it over there or was it over there? Like, I don't even remember which line it was.
Yeah.
Um, GM couldn't copy paste the lessons, even through a human, sort of copy paste function. Don Ephlin made efforts, but the UAW couldn't learn what they wanted to advocate for out of a movie. And so while you want to accelerate the journey, and so I don't want to say there are shortcuts. I think there are accelerants, but I think you got to learn it yourself. I think
Mm.
you go through a process of learning and evolution, of evolving to your own destination.
Yeah.
And the copy paste fundamentally doesn't work. And so, again, accelerants to make that journey faster, absolutely. Exporting learnings that you can integrate and experiment with, absolutely. But you still got to struggle your way through it on your own.
Mm. There's a Dr. Demingism about they don't know what to copy. So I've got that green book, that GM Competitive Manufacturing Practices Guide back in Texas. I need to dig that out and flip through. I bet the proportion of tools and methods to mindset, the ratio was very, very skewed toward tools. So again, like, copying the wrong things.
Yep. Yep. And when we started the Chrysler operating system journey, I kind of the initial proposal, which is really a head fake, was we're going to open up a school and train the UAW members. All the leaders easily saying yes to that. That's where the head fake was like, this is not going to get the job done. It's actually about leadership. And so the training journey focused on really from VPs through um, area managers, center managers, kind of one step below the plant manager roles as the leverage point. And and it still wasn't copy paste. It was, we're going to learn by doing the hard work.
Yeah.
Try to accelerate it, right? Try not to make it last 30 years, but we're going to learn by doing.
Yeah. And, there's in that learn by doing experimental frontline improvement, there are other things in the book about supporting team members in eliminating waste. Again, there's other references to decentralized decision making, decisions being made at the lowest level. But then, there are there's one other quote that I was looking for here. But yeah, I mean, it's all just, lean goodness. But, I think you had some good points when we were prepping for this, that there were some other factors that led to the difference between GM Fremont's productivity and NUMMI productivity, that it was the management system and some other structural things.
Yeah, and one of those is the product design, right? And the product design was fun. It was a Toyota design, right? And it had gone through, as well, we talking about Toyota product development systems, went through a different development process, a better understanding of risk, process, variation, et cetera, and and had a huge impact on both quality and productivity.
Yeah.
Uh, and so now it didn't have the reduction of wildcat strikes and the improvement in safety. It probably didn't have much impact there. Maybe a few nuggets here and there,
Yeah.
uh, but I would say, I had helped in my consulting days. I'd actually helped JD Power build their consulting brand. Right there,
Mhm.
they had the data, they had the awards, and the automotive companies were like, "Hey, help us." They didn't really have a consulting practice, so I actually helped build their consulting practice and the tools and methods that they would go into. But fundamentally, it was factory focused, and we'd even come out and saying, "Hey, most of your score is product."
Yeah.
And so let's start working on that. But like, no, no, it's just a factory initiative. So they had that to benefit from, but that wasn't part of the experiment for GM. At least they got to benefit from it in the Geo Prism or whatever.
Well, the Chevy Nova was the first product. It was the GM name-plated version, the relaunch of the Nova name. Quick trivia, I did a Google search here. The old story, the lore about how Nova didn't sell well in some countries because it means no go in Spanish. That's total BS, right? Nova means star.
Yeah, but it probably didn't always go. So
Yeah, yeah. But Startles. I mean, I remember like at one point they were building a Toyota. It was kind of like not even a crossover. It was more of a hatchback, and the Pontiac. It might have been the Pontiac Vibe. So basically the same design, the same car, different styling, different superficial differences, different nameplates. The used car value of the Toyota variant was way higher than the resale value of the Pontiac Vibe. And there's a A/B comparison of brand value and reputation.
Absolutely, because not everybody understood, right, that it was designed by Toyota, built by the Toyota production system. It was just, you just expected, do I want to go buy a used Pontiac, right?
Sure. Yeah. That occurs Pontiac, so hell no. You know,
And so that was absolutely very good A/B testing about the brand value and the perceived quality of how things work. So yeah, there were other factors that affected things that weren't part of the experiment, weren't part of the learning or even intended learning for GM that affected things. But uh, yeah, I don't think it diminishes the clear and obvious performance gains that NUMMI was able to accomplish. Yeah. But again, it wasn't all just by operating the factory better, and that's important to understand.
yeah. And yeah, you pointed out that Toyota didn't face activist investors, that they were able to take a long-term position. Like I remember Chrysler, I think was the one always being chased by like Kirk Kerkorian and
Yeah,
that's it. That
Corey was in the news, and tried to rebuy the company with Lee Iacocca at one point, and so there's a lot made of Toyota's long term thinking, but especially now, right? Toyota is so big that it's very hard for anybody to be strong enough to really muscle them. Trading rules are different in, and that control allows for that long term thinking. Whereas GM and Chrysler in particular could certainly be taken out and challenged, left, right, and center, especially when you also have a lot of debt in the books. I do think Ford had a little bit less of an excuse because they had, and I don't know if this is still true. I haven't looked it up recently, but they have two classes of shares, and the Ford
more,
family fundamentally controlled things, even if they didn't have the majority of the economic benefits, the
yeah,
majority of the voting shares. So they to me have a little less of an excuse for not thinking long term. And in a lot of cases, they did think longer term, but not enough of them.
yeah. That's hard to that's a hard habit to break.
Yes. Yep. Still had quarterly earnings reports, right? So
Yeah.
still got to answer that call.
Yeah.
Well, we could probably talk about Newly for hours. Anything else we want to cover around it?
I think those are the key. Encourage people come read the blog posts. I have not felt like it was legally safe or defensible to publish the entire document.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's in a library and people can go look at it.
AI has said though, even if it's in the library, there's still I don't want GM coming after me for publishing 40-year-old IP. There's nothing in there that's a secret at this point. I mean, I did point people, a couple of people asked, I'm like, you contact the library? Like, I don't know if the library, I went in person and I was allowed to take photos of the pages, but I don't,
Detroit's trying to rebuild itself, so go visit Detroit, right?
right. You just sign up and say, hey, I want to come visit the library. And they have a process, at least when I went. I don't know if stuff's been digitized, but you say, here are the files I want. Here are the files I'm interested in. And they give you a cart with here's the boxes with folders and don't mess it up, keep it organized, but have at it, read it, there was more than I could have possibly read during a visit. So that's why I'm going to take photos and read stuff later.
But we'll have several, you've done several posts about it. We'll link to all those in the show notes. So if you want to read more about it, there's plenty of stuff to read on.
Yeah. Not to be greedy, but like it's the same reason, with the document, but the same reason the Toyota Way 2001 document is not available online. I talked to the other day, Daryl Wilburn. I think it's okay to mention Daryl Wilburn, Daryl, former Toyota guy. We were catching up and doing a Zoom call, and over his head on the bookshelf in his office is that document that Toyota Way 2001 document, you know, so, but it's not freely available on the internet.
Yep. So AI and Google search, is not going to get you all the answers. Sometimes there's a lot of knowledge that's not available to be trained your AI tool on or search on the internet. So yeah. Mm. Uh, so all right. So more to read, more to study, more to learn, more to practice. We're going to wrap up as always with our cultural share, something we've read, tasted, experienced, listened to, watched that we want to share. So why don't you go first, Mark?
Yeah. So my wife and I were stumbling around Netflix looking for something new to watch, and the algorithm was good, or they're just promoting it because it's popular. A series, 8 30-minute episodes, a show called Big Mistakes. So the title, like, oh, mistakes. Oh, okay. I write a lot about mistakes. Dan Levy, famously of Schitt's Creek, is the co-creator and co-writer, and he stars in it. So it's not the Creek universe. It's about him and his family, and him and his sister get caught up in some things that some mistakes that then compound into bigger and bigger mistakes. So there's a second season coming out shortly or in the future. But we really enjoyed it. It's a different vibe. Than Schitt's Creek. It's a comedy. It gets pretty intense in some episodes, but highly recommended.
Yeah, it's great. I didn't even know about that. So I'm going to share as sort of in honor of Artemis 2 being launched, even though that's a little farther behind us now. Uh, if we're thinking about the best, it kind of got me interested in the best space movies, right? And
Mhm.
I'm talking about Star Wars, but space movies about real human events, and we have so many of them. There are a lot of movies about humans' adventures in space, but my favorite two had been Apollo 13, which now is kind of it's not a dated movie because the stories is the story.
Right.
But I'll talk to people about the movie and they're like, yeah, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, it was out before you were watching stuff like that. So Apollo 13, still a fantastic movie. And that Hidden Figures, I think is a tremendous movie, very
Yeah.
movie and insightful.
Loves.
But as Artemis 2 went up, how many people I talked to just about that,
Yeah.
our generation, who were sitting at the edge of their chair. And I was mostly excited, but I talked to so many people that were like, I was just waiting for it to explode.
Or traumatized by that Challenger.
Traumatized by then, right? Because we saw those things happen live, right? And where space shuttles exploded, and so yeah, so many people were just they were on their edge of their seats, not with excitement, but with sort of this anticipated fear of an explosion. And so I just found that amazing, the history that we share in that experience. So now I actually I just put a newsletter out recently, which kind of leverages the Apollo 13 story around strategic thinking. So we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting moments in that around strategic thinking and what happens when you have to change your strategy. But yeah, can't wait for Artemis 3. Yeah. Those are our cultural shares. Go watch some movies, go watch a show, go read Mark's vlogs, and I guess that's about it for today.
That is it. So I'm gonna go make a second cup of French press. I don't often crack out the French press, or maybe I'll try a pour over. I'm gonna do a pour over with these beans and see how that is. But good as always. When we did lean whiskey, there would have been. It's easier to do a second pour of bourbon. I never got drunk during an episode of lean whiskey. That wasn't the point. I don't think I'm over caffeinated.
No, I'm not over caffeinated, but I'm not sure I'm ready for another cup. To do a slightly bigger pour over than I usually do, just to kind of get me through the whole show. But I yeah, that's one of the, maybe you need a bigger French press just to be able to make a second pour. So
Yeah.
enjoy your your new beans,
My Burundi beans.
Burundi beans. I don't have a lot of these Peruvian beans left to roast, but I'll be looking for some more for sure. And until next time, I wish everyone all the best.
Yeah. And just one other thought, one other idea. Future theme needs to be the home roasting because I used to do that. I haven't done it in a while. I'd have to dig out the roaster somewhere, but let's talk about that in the future.
Well,
That'll
that
be
one, you.
that's a future episode. All right. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. Be well.